The Seven Ravens. A matter that is little understood in the world today, and especially within the Church where it is most needed, is the special relationship of Israel with the Church of Jesus Christ. This relationship is explained through the use of symbols in the book of Revelation in the Bible. The symbols used are the candlestick and the olive tree. These are the two witnesses standing before the God of the earth, as described in the 11th chapter, and are to have an important role in the coming drama of the ending of the present age. It would seem essential that we have a clear understanding of the rapport of Israel with the Church, which shall raise them up to heaven in a cloud, as further described in Revelation. This tremendous event is something that even their enemies shall behold, and for those of Israel who belong to the Church, there should be something of expectation of these things that lie just ahead. Our grasp of this is hindered, however, by a lack of understanding of the term Israel. Unless we know who Israel is, we cannot know who it is that shall come to this reward. And the fact that Israel bears a common affiliation with the Church is the subject of not only the 11th chapter of Revelation, but of the story of the seven ravens, also, with which we here deal. But first let us look at the term Israel. As the Saxon fairy tales attest, Israel is discovered preponderantly among the descendants of the Angles, the Saxons, the Celts, and the Jutes. Israel, as the name given to Jacob by God, is composed of the 12 tribes derived from his 12 sons, who in later years appeared upon the pages of history in the role of invaders conquering the island of England. To understand the role of Israel as it relates to the Church, it is imperative that we first determine who Israel is. Furthermore, without this understanding we cannot understand many of Jesus' sayings, particularly his promise to each of his apostles that each of them shall in his future kingdom rule one of the 12 tribes of Israel. It is obvious that since Judas betrayed his master that he shall not enjoy this privilege, but that Jesus himself as king shall rule the house of Judah, together with the other tribes of Israel, in the fulfillment of his promise to the apostles. This was a definite promise made by Jesus, and how can we know what he meant if we today do not know who are the tribes of Israel? If we do not understand this statement, how can we understand the angelic promise to Mary concerning her son Jesus, that he shall sit upon the throne of David, and that he shall reign in his kingdom upon the earth forever? We have already seen how the stories that have come to us out of the dim Saxon past augment and amplify the meaning of the stories and the symbols we find in the Bible. With them we may unravel many of the mysteries of the past. We may also peer more confidently into the future. We know that God has a plan. The author or authors of these stories framed them upon a familiar biblical background. We find old biblical characters in new dress and in new surroundings, just as the children of Israel found themselves in new country and in new situations after escaping from Babylon. The new center of Israel activity had gravitated north and west to what is now Saxony, Denmark, Normandy, and later to England, and finally to the Americas and to all parts of the globe. The very place of origin of these stories add another mark of identification of modern Israel. Conjoined as they are with the whole racial heritage of the Anglo-Saxon Celtic peoples of the world today, their very content holds the key to further discoveries of this valuable heritage. They prescribe and hold the very birthright of Israel, even though she herself has forgotten it. Some day, and soon, she will be glad to claim this birthright. It will mean her very life to regain it. But now let us turn to the story of the seven ravens and look for the message it contains for Israel as a people and Israel as an agency of rescue to the Church. In this story, the teller has very deftly reached out for new symbols, and he does this for a very definite reason. His purpose here is to portray the truths of the Bible a little more colorfully, a little more convincingly, with a special appeal to children. He is also intent upon depicting conditions today, so that we in turn will recognize them for what they are. In this story, he describes the modern-day church, using symbols just as accurate and just as telling as any in Revelation. In Revelation, John is shown the 7 candlesticks as the symbols for Christ's church. In our story, the candlesticks are changed to ravens, and the negative account of the 7 churches of Revelation becomes the story of the 7 ravens. In Revelation, John tells how he turned to see the voice that spake with him, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hair were white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. This description of the ascended Jesus is one of the most magnificent which the Bible affords. At the sight of this majestic being, it is no wonder that John was greatly overcome, and fell at his feet as dead. In such a manner must have Jesus appeared to Saul on the road to Damascus. Saul, because of the dark purpose of his journey, and by the negative nature that was his, must have been stunned at the sight of the glory of Jesus even more so than John. John, who loved Jesus all the days of his ministry and was very devoted to him. It is significant that John spies first the 7 candlesticks with which the very presence of the Christ is merged. In the last verse of this first chapter is given the meaning of the candlesticks which John saw. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. The symbol for the churches is, spiritually speaking, the candlesticks. The reason for the choice of ravens as symbols for the churches by our author is explained in the 2nd and 3rd chapters of Revelation. These chapters are devoted to describing the churches in future history, pointing out to John the faults and the error into which the church is fallen in each era of the future church. While these descriptions are given as messages from Jesus to the local churches served by John, the churches at Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, all clustered together within a very small area of southern Turkey. Jesus was speaking in larger terms to the whole of his church as it extended its life down through the avenues of the future. Having been given knowledge of the entire future at his ascension into heaven, Jesus here describes the frailties and weaknesses of his church as it expands and grows. These are all human qualities, not of the light. They were anything but spiritual qualities, the qualities of the lighted candlestick. So the church as the raven is described in our story according to its worldly characteristics. The raven wears the blackest of the black. In a search for symbols, our author obviously chose this bird for its complete blackness. This bird is in direct contrast to the selection of the white dove found in the story of Cinderella and the white duck in the story of Hansel and Gretel. Whereas the white bird denotes always the presence of the Holy Ghost, the black raven would denote the absence of this same Spirit. The lack of attention to the Holy Spirit is characteristic of the church of today. Healing, which is a function of the Holy Spirit, is almost absent from the church today. That divine alertness which is so necessary to meeting the satanic influences in modern life, and awareness of the sublime presence of God so vital to the spiritual strength of the Christian, is lacking. Jesus describes this church as lukewarm, and says, Go then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither hot nor cold, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Because thou sayest, I am rich, and increased in goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched, and miserable, and poor, and blind, and naked. Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 through 17. If this be Jesus' analysis of the future church, let us study the story in hand, and see what we can find in it for us. Our story opens with the announcement, There was once a man who had 7 sons. And inasmuch as these sons are later changed into the 7 ravens of our title, we may associate these 7 sons with the 7 candlesticks as being the true church, the living body of the Christ. These 7 sons are also the church perfected, since after being wished into being 7 ravens, they are changed back again into their original nature. 7 is also the number of perfection, so that the use of the symbol 7 in this story has the same meaning that it has in Revelation and elsewhere in the Bible. Bible. This change of form from ravens into men will lend us some enlightenment on the function of Israel in her relationship with the church. As the story goes, we find the father wishing that he had a daughter, and finally, after much waiting, he is blessed with one. We recognize this daughter at once from our study of other Saxon folk tales as representing Israel. The joy at her arrival was very great, but she was sickly and small and had to be privately baptized on account of its weakness. The father sent one of the boys in haste to the spring to fetch water for the baptism. The other 6 went with him, and as each of them wanted to be first to fill it, the jug fell in the well. When the boys failed to return with the water, the father suspects them to have gone after game, and in anger makes a foolish wish. I wish the boys were all turned into ravens, and so they were. Baptism is an essential ritual in the church, being the first step a Christian takes in joining the church. The struggle of the boys over the jug indicates a contention amongst them, and would indicate the contention that has existed within the church over doctrine, especially over the rite of baptism. Jesus said to the woman of Samaria at the well, "Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life." Water that we drink must first of all be pure. Water symbolizes, therefore, in our story, purity of heart. This purity of heart is a prelude to the visitation of the Holy Spirit, of God Himself, just as was demonstrated at the baptism of Jesus at the river Jordan. Water signifies the living presence of God as avowed earlier by Isaiah. The Lord shall guide thee, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. Isaiah chapter 48, verse 11. Zealous as were the apostolic fathers of the church in trying to form the structure of the church, many differences of opinion sprang up. Points of dogma became points of division. And from the earliest days of the Church, the manner in which baptism should be administered has been one of the chief causes for splits within the Church. The fighting of the boys at the well dramatizes this difference among the different denominations over the proper method of baptism until the real meaning of baptism has been lost. The jug has fallen into the well, indeed, and the 7 sons have been changed into 7 ravens. The choice of the raven as the form into which the boys were changed has great import here. Black as a raven is one of our strongest expressions of blackness. This black is even blacker than the night, which is always shot through with blue and violet. Black is the complete lack of color, just as white contains all colors. In fairy stories, the witch is invariably clothed in black, has a black cat as a companion, and travels chiefly by night. As the Bible clearly states, there are 2 forces in the world, the power of God and the power of Satan. Satan has the ability to appear in different forms, beginning with the temptation in the Garden of Eden when he came to Eve in the form of a serpent. In the beginning the earth was created out of light, Genesis chapter 1 verse 3. And throughout the Bible, God and His Son Jesus are seen in terms of burning, blazing light. On the other hand, Satan is associated with the darkness, as stated by Jesus at the hour of His betrayal. Then said Jesus unto the chief priests and captains of the temple and the elders, which were come to him, Be ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves? When I was daily with you in the temple, ye stretched forth no hands against me, but this is your hour, and the power of darkness. Luke chapter 22, verses 52 and 53. At this time Jesus acknowledged the power of the darkness, and He declared the chief priests and the captains of the temple as agents of darkness. As agents of God and as bearers of light, the children of Israel are often referred to as the children of light. They were chosen of God to live and conduct themselves in such a way that He could implement the light through them to the uplifting of the rest of the peoples of earth. Ye are the bearers of light. This drama of struggle between light and darkness is the very theme of the Bible, and in Revelation we see the heralding of the final victory of light over darkness. It is only to be expected that the church should become the chief target for the forces of darkness. Once Jesus had been crucified and supposedly gotten out of the picture, Jesus foresees this attempt and points out to the church of Pergamus, situated even where Satan's seat is, the danger. Revelation chapter 2, verse 13. Jesus foresaw the same old leanings toward the doctrine of Balaam, the same Balaam who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel. Revelation chapter 2, verse 14. In the church named Thyatira, Jesus perceives the same tendency in the Christians of the future to succumb to the age-old influences of Jezebel. He calls Jezebel a false prophetess, given as she was to the worship of Baal. And so, by degrees, Jesus points out to John the assault Satan shall make upon his church in the centuries ahead. He shows John the weaknesses and the strength of his church in its 7 phases of unfolding. To each one he imparts some few loving words of admonishment. Would that all in the church today might hear and accept this advice, flung to them across the space of centuries by their leader, even Jesus Christ their Lord. The change of the 7 sons into 7 ravens bespeaks the entry of Satan into the very sanctuary of the church. Using the powers of darkness, he has sought to change the character of the church, to undermine the work of Jesus, and twist it into an instrument of his own power. How he has succeeded in doing this is a matter of observation, even for those of the church of today. These are only a few of the more obvious intrusions of Satan in the life of our day. They are proof that the church is not sacred to this dark force. Most of the influences of this force, however, are more subtle and not so easily detected. There is a silent, unseen force at work, a kind of hypnosis which would lull and put to sleep the watchers within the church, the same force that put to sleep the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane so long ago. Sleepest thou? Couldst thou not watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. Mark chapter 14, verses 37 through 38. Thus asked Jesus of his disciples in that dark hour. Such is the question that he asks of every Christian today. As the Father spoke the words that changed his sons into ravens, he looked up and saw 7 coal-black ravens flying away. The parents could not cancel the curse, and however sad they were at the loss of their 7 sons, they still to some extent comforted themselves with their dear little daughter, who soon grew strong and every day became more beautiful. Then follows in our story a very revealing statement. For a long time she did not know that she had had brothers, for her parents were careful not to mention them before her. This passage refers to a definite time period in history. The little daughter we recognize again as Israel, the darling of her father's heart, none other than God the Father, whose love for Israel is so variously expressed in the passages of the Bible. Latter-day Israel was ready when the first Christians began to arrive in Ireland, England, and Scotland. In about the year 38 A.D., Joseph of Arimathea left Jerusalem and with a group of other followers of Jesus arrived on England's shores. They came inland to an island called Glastonbury, and there he erected a little wattle church, the first Christian church in England. Thus the seed of the church was sown in England direct from Jerusalem by those who knew and loved Jesus. The church grew and expanded, extending from England to Ireland and from Ireland to Scotland, so that by the time that the Angles and Saxons and Jutes began to arrive in England, missionaries were sent among them to convert them to Christianity. Chief among these Celtic Christians was Aidan, a product of the tiny island monastery of Iona off the coast of Scotland. Aidan wandered through England bringing the message of the gospel to the invaders wherever he found them, and singly converted more to Christianity than any other missionary. Thus was enacted the first meeting of Israel with the church, and the process of amalgamation began. Thus, for this period of approximately 450 years, Israel wandered through the wildernesses of Europe like lost sheep, unaware that their shepherd had appeared in faraway and forgotten Palestine. Under penalty of God's law, they were sentenced to wandering without leadership, without their shepherd, and seemingly outside of God's grace. But God, in his great wisdom, had sent Jeremiah in 580 B.C. with the daughter of King Zedekiah to the Isles in anticipation of his planting and building the British nation and empire. In this way he sought to preserve the ruling house of David for Israel, this same Israel that was taken captive by the Assyrians and only beginning to break her bonds. Then in 38 A.D., with the arrival of Joseph of Arimathea on England's shores, with the nucleus of the church and the message of his son, the time was come for Israel's redemption, and Israel answered readily to the call, to Christ. This portion of our story points then to the period of history when Israel was lost in the wilderness and was ignorant of the existence of Christ and the birth of his church. This is the period referred to by the prophet Hosea when he said, "For the children of Israel shall abide many days (years) without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an image, and without an ephod, and without a teraphim." Hosea chapter 3, verse 4. This was part of the punishment for having forsaken the laws of God. This punishment was not to be fully lifted from them until the end of the 7 times of the Gentiles, or 2,520 years. The bringing of the Stone of Scone from Scotland to Westminster Abbey by King Edward signaled the end of the prophecy of Hosea, and a prince of the house of David again ruled over Israel, and no more would she be without an ephod and without a teraphim. As the inflowing tribes of Israel accepted Christianity, we witnessed the blending of Israel and the church. This process was overwatched by an angel of the Lord, who says in Revelation, "I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days (years), clothed in sackcloth." These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. Revelation chapter 11, verses 3 and 4. As was divulged in our study of the story of Snow White, the olive trees are the 2 houses, the house of Judah and the house of Israel. Here is Israel pictured as merged with the church, the candlesticks, or a refined portion thereof, and readying herself for the coming of the prince as a watchful, waiting bride. We get an idea of the function of Israel pertaining to the church in a study of our story. The church in England was quite distinct from the church in Rome, in Carthage, in Alexandria, and in Constantinople, for it is linked very closely with Israel. Destined to receive the restored rulership of the house of David, England became a chosen instrument for that particular purpose. Redeemed through the sacrifice of His Son, Jesus Christ, the covenant relationship was restored, and God began to use England as a part of His great unfolding plan for Israel and the earth. This acceptance by Israel of Christianity and her new resolve is reflected in our story when the princess discovers that she has 7 brothers, and decides that she must deliver her brothers. She had no rest or peace until she set out secretly and went forth in the wide world to trace out her brothers and set them free, let it cost what it might. While the early church in England had thrived and in its zeal began to send missionaries onto the continent, the church at Rome was not asleep to the great field of opportunity that lay in England. Pope Gregory I sent Augustine as Archbishop to Canterbury. Acting under Gregory's guidance, Augustine sought gradually to make the English church conform to Rome and Rome's requirements. He insisted on the use of Latin in the worship services, and sought to get the backing of the rulers in England for his edicts. It was a dark day in the history of the English Church when at the Synod of Whitby in 664 the King of Northumbria heard the differences between the leaders of the 2 churches and decided in favor of Rome. From that day until the time of John Wycliffe, centuries later, the Bible remained a Latin book and closed for the common people's understanding. Thereafter only wandering bards recited biblical stories and ballads in English by memory. Thus, in another way, were the 7 sons, the Church, changed into 7 ravens, and Israel began to look for a means of changing the ravens back into her fine brothers. The search of Israel for her 7 brothers is part of the inner urge of Israel, when she broke the bondage of Assyria and passed north and west beyond the headwaters of the Euphrates, as described in 2nd Esdras, to eventually arrive in England. This journey is unrecorded in the general annals of history, and according to God's will was meant to be so. In the story, the little daughter searched even to the sun, the moon, and stars for her brothers, and all to no avail. The sun, the moon, and the stars are symbols, identical here with those of Revelation chapter 8, verse 12. And the 4th angel sounded, and the 3rd part of the sun was smitten, and the 3rd part of the moon, and the 3rd part of the stars. The sun, the moon, and earth are symbols for the ruling powers of the earth, and in this passage of Revelation refer to Rome and the Roman governors in the provinces of the Roman Empire. Not from earthly rulers was Israel to find any satisfaction in the search for her destiny, but finally from one star, the young daughter of our story, found help. But the morning star arose, and gave her the drumstick of a chicken, and said, If thou hast not that drumstick, thou canst not open the glass mountain, and in the glass mountain are thy brothers. Here we find 3 important symbols used, each of which is vital to the understanding of our story as it pertains to Israel. First, let us consider the morning star, in contrast with the other stars mentioned previously. In Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, we have the statement from Jesus himself, I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. There is no room for doubt here. The morning star is the same symbol of the Bible used by Jesus to describe himself, and is employed thusly in our story. In the next verse from the quotation given above, we are given an inkling of the role of Israel as relates to the church. And the Spirit and the bride, Israel, say, Come, and let him that heareth, the overcomer, say, Come, and let him that is athirst come. Israel has a very distinct part to play in that great day when Christ shall come in his great glory and claim his bride as his own. Likewise, Israel plays a hidden but no less important role today as she who searches out all who might be readied as guests of the bridegroom when he comes. What of the drumstick held out to the youngest daughter by the morning star? In the 14th verse of this same chapter in Revelation, we read, Blessed are they that do his commandments. The drumstick is the fairy story symbol for the commandments of God, graven upon the tablets of stone. The implication is that if Israel should keep the covenant and live according to God's will, she should enjoy the blessings of the kingdom of heaven upon earth. The symbol given in Daniel for this kingdom, as elsewhere, is a mountain. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 35, this kingdom is described as the fifth and final kingdom which shall rule the earth. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, filled the whole earth. In our story, the morning star, Jesus, directs the young daughter, Israel, to the glass mountain as the place where she will find her brothers. But she is told she cannot get in without the drumsticks, i.e., she cannot have the kingdom without keeping God's laws. Jesus in his ministry said, Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Matthew chapter 4, verse 17. The covenant name of God, I am, is also the name of the Christ. Moses was told to say to the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. Had the temple priests and the Pharisees of Jerusalem recognized Jesus, the Christ, as the I am, that sent Moses to lead the children of Israel, their acceptance of him as the Messiah would have been more likely. When these argumenters hearkened back to Abraham as their chief authority, Jesus answered them, Before Abraham was, I am, again asserting his unity with the Godhead and announcing his identity. John chapter 8, verse 58. Jesus gave his inner name publicly and privately in countless affirmations of his authority, such as, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am one that beareth witness of myself, and the Father that sent me beareth witness of me. I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am the resurrection and the life. These are the few of many announcements of Jesus that he was, and is the I am that instructed Moses in the beginning and sought to lead his flock into the paths of righteousness, which should give them freedom and happiness. Men were blind to his true nature in that day. They are blind to his true nature today. Is it any wonder that he stated that he had come to fulfill the law rather than to destroy it? He who had in his divine wisdom given forth the law? If today Christians realized that the laws of Israel were actually the laws of Jesus Christ, would they not more seriously try to live by these laws? The time is very short when Jesus shall come and stand before the whole world and say, I am come in judgment, just as he said in Jerusalem nearly 2,000 years ago. But this time he shall come in power and glory. Men shall not crucify him again, but rather shall he judge them by their faith or by their sins, and take to himself his own. The maiden took the drumstick, wrapped it carefully in a cloth, and went onwards again until she came to the glass mountain. The door was shut, and she thought she would take out the drumstick, but when she undid the cloth it was empty, and she had lost the good star's present. This loss of the drumstick is symbolic of the breaking of the covenant by the children of Israel and the loss of the lands of Canaan which God had given them. This passage is the subject matter of the book of Jeremiah in the Bible, and the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy is the destruction of Jerusalem and the capture of the house of Judah, similar to that of the house of Israel, and their removal as bond slaves to the lands of Babylon. The kingdom of God became an unfulfilled promise to them, but only because of their rejection of God's laws and wishes for them. The redemption of these people is next described in our story, the same redemption as depicted in the Bible through the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Having lost the drumstick, The covenant relationship having been broken, the little sister took a knife, cut off one of her little fingers, put it in the door, and succeeded in opening it. The little finger mentioned here is the symbol for Jesus Christ, and the cutting off of the little finger betokens the broken, bleeding body of our Lord upon the cross. It was by the willing sacrifice of Jesus that the sons and heirs of Israel were canceled out, so that she might go on to fulfill her destiny ordained by God. As a rescuer of Israel, Jesus clearly foresaw need of an intermediary agent, and that agent was himself. But the rescue will not be completed until the return of Jesus himself to the earth, and at that time will Israel receive her promised reward. For let us not forget that Jesus is He that is holy, He that is true, He that hath the key of David, Revelation chapter 3, verse 7, and that as the Lion of Judah Jesus is and will be the King of all Israel upon his return. The black cloak that enshrouds the church today will not be removed until that great day. It shall be replaced at that time with a garment of shining white light, even the garment of righteousness, which is ready to be worn by the saints. Jesus left with his disciples the simple ceremony of the Holy Communion to remind him of his sacrifice. And he took bread, and gave thanks, and brake it, and gave unto them, saying, This is my body which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Luke chapter 22, verse 19. Jesus saw the importance of Christians down through the centuries to remind themselves of his sacrifice. It is through the observance of this request of his that Christians draw closer to each other in love and are prompted to follow in the way of the Master. By means of the Christ shall Israel have her inheritance and enter into the rewards of the kingdom, and through her shall the church be rescued from the spell that has been cast upon her. As the two witnesses shall they stand side by side before the God of the earth, and perceive his glory and his great beneficence. And so, in our story, it is by means of her little finger that the maiden opens the door into the glass mountain. Having gained entry into the mountain, the 7 ravens are not to be found too readily. We here get an insight into the manner in which the 7 brothers, the church, are to be restored. A dwarf shows the maiden where the ravens were wont to stay, but tells her that they are not at home. The Lord ravens are not at home, but if you will wait here until they come, step in. As the dwarf brings in dinner in preparation for the coming of the ravens, we see the maid tasting of each plate and sipping from each glass. In the last glass she dropped a ring which she had brought away with her. It is significant here that it is the maid, Israel, who has the ring, and that it is by recognizing this ring that the ravens knew their little sister and are magically changed back into their human form again. Thereupon they embraced and kissed each other and went joyfully home. The transformation of the ravens into the 7 brothers is described in Revelation chapter 11, verse 12. The Spirit of the life of God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven, saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. The transformation of Israel and the church will actually take place at the same time. The glorified church and sanctified Israel will rise together in the ascension. Thus, the pattern which Jesus set for them on the hill of Bethany so long ago will take effect for thousands of individuals in the very near future. It remains for those of the church to look upon the ring that will identify Israel for them, and then shall they rejoice and return home with her to the Father. This process of revealing the marks of identification of Israel is now in progress, and it is imperative that as many as possible in the church awaken to this great truth. It is essential to their own salvation as well as national Israel. It is not destined for all in the church to awaken, as indicated in Matthew chapter 25, verse 1, but joyous rewards await those who do. Discernment and decision, these are the 2 qualities which Jesus would ask of his followers in these turbulent days. And there are 2 other words which he left for those of this generation which we should honor: watch and pray. Again, in the story of the 7 ravens, we have been given a pattern of the past and a pattern for the future. We note that this story, as do the other Saxon tales, has an assuring note of certainty for us today. The story backs up the Bible. It opens our eyes as to the meaning of the 2nd and 3rd chapters of Revelation, which is an enigma to many. It is a story for children, yes, but only secondarily so. It was designed to strengthen the wavering Christian of today, to reveal to him the times in which he lives in a new light, and so extend to him courage and promise for the future. Marvelous events lie just ahead for him, could he but see them. It is for this purpose that the Saxon folk tales were created. They were meant to entertain children, yes, but further than that, they were to strengthen the faith of the believer and enlarge his understanding that he might be a more vibrant Christian, faithful, true, and strong. The end.